By the mid-1700s, European settlers began arriving, moving inward from the coastal colonies in search of fertile soil and opportunity. Many were of Scots-Irish descent, bringing with them strong faith, hard work, and a quiet defiance. They followed old native trading paths through the Carolinas, and it was here, at the crossing of two of those paths, that the city of Charlotte would one day rise. One of those ancient trails ran north to south, connecting the Catawba lands to the Cherokee territories. The other stretched east to west, linking the Atlantic coast to the mountains. Where they met became known as the Great Wagon Road. It was the perfect place for a settlement. No one at that time imagined this small backcountry crossroad would one day anchor one of America's largest banking centers. In 1755, a small cluster of settlers built cabins near the intersection. They farmed, traded, and survived through uncertain times. Among them was Thomas Polk, a prominent early leader who would later shape the town's foundation. Polk, a surveyor and soldier, saw potential where others saw wilderness. He began laying out streets and boundaries, unknowingly scripting the first pages of Charlotte's story. By 1768, the growing settlement needed a name. The British Crown still ruled the colonies, and loyalty was not only expected, it was demanded. To show their allegiance, the settlers named their new town after Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, wife of King George III. Thus, Charlottetown was born, and the surrounding county took the Queen's name too, Mecklenburg. But beneath this polite gesture of royal tribute, rebellion was brewing. The same settlers who named their town after a queen were becoming restless under royal rule. Charlotte's early residents were tough, self-reliant people who didn't take kindly to outside control. By 1775, more than a year before the Declaration of Independence, local leaders gathered in the heart of the town and drafted what would become known as the Mecklenburg Resolves. Some claim it was the first Declaration of Independence in the American colonies. Whether or not it truly came first, one thing is certain: the spirit of independence burned bright in Charlotte. British forces later called it a hornet's nest of rebellion, a phrase that stuck so deeply it became the city's symbol. To this day, Charlotte's NBA team, the Hornets, carries that legacy. But let's pause for a moment. How did a small settlement with fewer than 200 people end up playing a role in the early independence movement? The answer lies in its geography and its grit. The Great Wagon Road made Charlotte a crossroads of ideas. Travelers brought news from Philadelphia, Charleston, and beyond. Farmers and traders shared stories, grievances, and dreams of freedom. It was a melting point of frontier determination and revolutionary thought. Yet, war would test everything they built. When the Revolutionary War reached the Carolinas, Charlotte's people were caught in the storm. The British, under General Cornwallis, marched into town in 1780. Expecting easy control, they met fierce resistance. Local militia harassed British troops from every side, forcing Cornwallis to withdraw after only a few weeks. Frustrated and bloodied, he left, calling Charlotte a damned hornet's nest of rebellion. But victory came at a cost. The town suffered damages, farms were burned, and families were displaced. When the war ended, Charlotte was small, scarred, and poor. Yet something deeper had taken root. A belief that survival wasn't enough. They wanted prosperity. They wanted recognition. And then, in a twist of fate, something glittered beneath the Carolina soil. In 1799, a 12-year-old boy named Conrad Reed found a large yellow rock in a creek on his family's farm just east of Charlotte. His family used it as a doorstop for years before a jeweler revealed the truth. It was gold, weighing 17 pounds. That discovery changed everything. It sparked America's first gold rush, decades before California's. Prospectors flooded the region, and Charlotte transformed almost overnight. Mines opened across the countryside, and fortunes were made and lost beneath its hills. By the early 1800s, Charlotte was booming with miners, traders, and craftsmen. The U.S. government even opened a branch mint in 1837 to handle the local gold supply. Coins stamped with a C for Charlotte began circulating nationwide, a symbol of a once tiny town now rich with promise. But every boom carries its shadow. The gold rush drew wealth and opportunity, but it also deepened divides. Enslaved labor was used in the mines, and many African Americans were forced into brutal, dangerous work underground. Wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, while many struggled to survive. The prosperity that shined above ground was built in part on suffering below it. And when the Civil War arrived, those divides would explode into conflict. Charlotte, still small by northern standards, found itself swept into one of the darkest chapters in American history. The gold that once promised wealth would now help fuel a war economy. Factories shifted from production to supporting the Confederate cause, and the mint shut down under Union blockade. When the war ended, Charlotte's future seemed uncertain once again. Its fields were battered, its economy shattered. Yet, this was not the end of its story. If anything, it was just the beginning of its reinvention. Because in the years after the Civil War, Charlotte would transform again from a fallen gold town into something new entirely. It would trade in its mines for mills, its coins for cotton, and begin its climb toward becoming the beating financial heart of the South. The Civil War left Charlotte bruised but breathing. While other southern towns lay in ruins, Charlotte had escaped large-scale destruction. Its buildings still stood, its roads still connected the region, and its people, determined, pragmatic, and proud, were ready to rebuild. But what does a city do when its old wealth, its gold, has run out? The answer came in white fibers that grew from the red Carolina soil: cotton. By the late 1800s, the South was searching for a new identity. The phrase New South began spreading, a call for modernization, for progress without abandoning the past. For Charlotte, this wasn't just talk, it became a mission. The city's leaders, including men like Daniel Augustus Tompkins, saw opportunity in the cotton industry. Tompkins, a mechanical engineer who had worked in the North, returned to the Carolinas with a vision: to build a southern manufacturing empire. Instead of shipping raw cotton north for processing, he wanted mills right here in Charlotte's backyard. And that's exactly what happened. Throughout the late 19th century, textile mills sprang up across the Piedmont region. Charlotte became the heart of it all, the hub for finance, trade, and transport. Its central location between the coast and the mountains made it ideal for distributing goods across the Carolinas and beyond. But Charlotte's greatest advantage wasn't geography. It was its rails. By the 1850s, railroads had begun carving through the Carolina landscape, connecting towns and transforming trade. The arrival of the Charlotte and South Carolina Railroad in 1852 marked a turning point. Later expansions linked Charlotte to major cities like Atlanta, Richmond, and Wilmington. After the war, these connections became lifelines. Cotton came in from rural farms, finished textiles went out to national markets, and Charlotte, once a quiet gold town, became the command center of a booming regional economy. Still, beneath the hum of progress, not everyone shared in the prosperity. The textile industry depended heavily on cheap labor. Mill work was grueling, noisy, and low-paid. Entire families, men, women, and children, spent their days in spinning rooms and weaving floors, inhaling cotton dust and enduring 12-hour shifts. The city grew fast, but inequality grew with it. The divide between mill owners and workers widened, and for Black residents who faced the crushing weight of segregation and systemic exclusion, opportunity was scarce. Charlotte was growing, but unevenly. By 1880, the city had about 7,000 residents. 2 decades later, that number had tripled. Streetcars began running through its core.
Churches, schools, and public buildings rose along Trade and Tryon streets, the same intersection where the old wagon roads once met. Charlotte was no longer a small town. It was a modern southern city in the making. But growth brought new challenges and new power players. In the late 19th century, local banks began emerging to fund cotton, construction, and trade. One of these, the First National Bank of Charlotte, became one of the most powerful financial institutions in the region. Money was flowing again, not from gold mines, but from factories, rails, and commerce. Still, Charlotte wasn't immune to national turmoil. The Panic of 1893 hit hard. Factories slowed, banks faltered, and unemployment rose. But each setback seemed to forge the city's resilience deeper. By the dawn of the 20th century, Charlotte had learned how to survive economic shocks, a lesson that would prove vital for its future as a banking hub. Yet, what truly set Charlotte apart was its hunger to move forward. The city began branding itself as the Queen City of the New South. Its skyline, though modest, reflected ambition. And in a region struggling to reconcile its past, Charlotte positioned itself as a place of progress, one that could lead without forgetting its roots. But growth brought new challenges. In 1903, labor unrest shook the region. Textile workers began demanding fair pay and safer conditions. Mill owners resisted, fearing disruption. Protests and strikes spread, and Charlotte, though not the most violent flashpoint, felt the tremors. The city's leadership sided with business, reinforcing a power dynamic that would shape Southern labor relations for decades. At the same time, Jim Crow laws solidified racial segregation. African Americans, who had been central to Charlotte's growth, were pushed to the margins. Neighborhoods such as Brooklyn and Second Ward became thriving black communities, rich in culture and resilience, but limited by law and opportunity. Still, life pulsed through these streets. Black-owned businesses, churches, and schools flourished despite discrimination. Charlotte's Johnson C. Smith University, founded in 1867 as Biddle Memorial Institute, became a cornerstone of education and progress for African Americans across the South. So, while the city's official narrative spoke of railroads and cotton mills, another, quieter story unfolded in parallel, one of endurance, creativity, and unrecognized contribution. By the early 1900s, Charlotte's population had surpassed 30,000. The city buzzed with trolleys, commerce, and ambition. But one question lingered. Could it sustain this momentum in a rapidly changing America? The answer came in steel, smoke, and the roar of engines.
Then came the Great Depression. The crash of 1929 hit Southern industry hard. Cotton prices collapsed, mills closed, and unemployment surged. For a city that had built its identity on industry, the economic blow was severe. Yet again, Charlotte's resilience was tested. Banks consolidated, small businesses adapted, and city leaders sought ways to reinvent the economy. One of those banks, American Trust Company, founded in 1909, survived the storm and grew stronger. Decades later, it would become part of a name the world now knows, Bank of America. As the 1940s dawned, Charlotte stood at a turning point. The scars of the Great Depression were still visible, but something new was stirring, a sense of purpose, of movement, of renewal. When World War II began, that energy found its outlet. The war changed everything. Factories that once produced textiles shifted to military supplies. Charlotte's railroads carried troops and materials. Local women entered the workforce in record numbers, filling roles that men had left behind. The hum of production echoed through the city, and for the first time in decades, the future looked wide open. But the end of the war didn't bring calm, it brought acceleration. Returning soldiers needed homes. Families needed jobs. Highways and new suburbs began spreading outward from the old city center, transforming Charlotte from a compact industrial town into a sprawling urban region.
Neighborhoods such as Myers Park, Dilworth, and Plaza Midwood filled with young families chasing post-war dreams. At the same time, new technologies were reshaping how Charlotte connected to the rest of the nation. The expansion of Douglas Municipal Airport, which would later become Douglas Delta International, turned the city into a transportation hub, linking it to national markets and paving the way for its future global reach. But beneath this image of post-war progress, old inequalities lingered. Charlotte was growing, but not everyone shared in its prosperity. Segregation still divided the city, by race, by neighborhood, by opportunity. Black residents were largely confined to areas such as Brooklyn, Greenville, and Wilmore. Schools, buses, and restaurants remained separate by law. Yet within those boundaries, something powerful was taking shape, a rising movement for equality. The 1950s brought the early sparks of the civil rights era, and Charlotte became a stage where history played out in both quiet defiance and bold courage. In 1954, the Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education decision declared school segregation unconstitutional. The question was, how would Southern cities respond? Charlotte's answer was complex. Some leaders sought peaceful progress, others resisted change. It took years of legal battles and public pressure to push integration forward. But one case in particular would change the nation. In 1971, a Charlotte parent named Darius Swan filed a lawsuit against the city's school board, arguing that his son should be able to attend a closer, predominantly white school. The case, Swan v. Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education, reached the Supreme Court, resulting in a historic decision that upheld busing as a means to achieve school desegregation. It was a landmark moment, not just for Charlotte, but for America. The ruling made Charlotte a national model for how to handle integration. It wasn't easy. Tensions ran high, protests erupted, and communities struggled to adjust. But many historians now credit the city's eventual cooperation for helping it move forward peacefully, while other cities descended into chaos. Still, this period of transformation wasn't only about law and justice, it was also about identity. By the 1950s and 60s, Charlotte was shedding its image as a textile town. Mills were closing or relocating to cheaper regions. But instead of collapsing, the city pivoted once again. Its leaders began focusing on business, finance, and transportation. New industries took root. Banks expanded. Insurance companies set up offices downtown. A new skyline began to rise, signaling ambition. The city's old dependence on cotton gave way to commerce, investment, and innovation. But progress had a cost, and it was paid in part by the destruction of history. In the 1960s, under the banner of urban renewal, city planners targeted what they labeled blighted areas for redevelopment. One of those was Brooklyn, Charlotte's largest black neighborhood. Brooklyn was more than a place. It was a thriving community of thousands. It had churches, shops, schools, and pride. But to city officials eager to modernize, it stood in the path of downtown growth. Bulldozers rolled through in the late 1960s, demolishing hundreds of homes and displacing families.
For many, it was a wound that never healed. Out of the rubble came government buildings, new roads, and shiny structures meant to symbolize progress. But for the families forced out, it was a painful reminder of how easily people could be sacrificed in the name of urban ambition. Charlotte's dual identity, ambitious yet divided, progressive yet painful, was now set in stone. Yet, through it all, the city continued to evolve. Its population surpassed 200,000 by 1970. The economy diversified. Higher education expanded, anchored by institutions like the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, founded in 1946 and growing rapidly by the 1960s. The seeds of modern Charlotte were being planted by business leaders, by educators, by citizens who believed the city could be something more. And behind the scenes, One man's vision was beginning to reshape Charlotte's destiny forever. A local banker named Hugh McCall. At that time, McCall was a young executive at North Carolina National Bank, or NCNB. His ambition was clear. He wanted to turn Charlotte into a financial powerhouse to rival New York. He believed the South could lead in finance, not just follow. His ideas would sound bold, even impossible in a city still seen as provincial. But within a few decades, McCall's dream would come true, and the skyline would rise to prove it. Charlotte was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. It had gone from cotton to commerce, from segregation to integration, from a quiet southern city to a place with national influence. By the 1970s, Charlotte stood on the edge of transformation once again. The cotton mills were quiet, the railroads had lost their roar, and the gold that once fueled its early dreams was long gone. Yet something new was about to rise, not from the ground, but from the vaults. Banking would become Charlotte's new industry of gold. At first, no one could have predicted it. The city's financial sector was small, local, and cautious. Banks served neighborhoods, not nations. But one man saw potential where others saw limits. Hugh McCall, a Marine veteran turned banker at North Carolina National Bank, NCNB. McCall was restless, ambitious, determined to prove that Charlotte could compete with financial giants in New York and San Francisco. Under his leadership, NCNB didn't just want to grow, it wanted to dominate. But there was one problem. Federal laws at the time restricted banks from expanding across state lines. The South was full of small, fragmented banks, safe, conservative, and local. McCall wanted to change that. And he did. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, McCall pushed for deregulation, arguing that Southern banks could handle national competition. His timing was perfect. As federal rules began to relax in the 1980s, NCNB moved fast, buying up smaller banks across the Southeast, building a financial empire headquartered right in downtown Charlotte. While the rest of America was looking toward Wall Street, McCall was quietly building a new Wall Street in the South. And Charlotte began to change around it. Downtown, cranes filled the skyline. New office towers arose, symbols of ambition and wealth. The city that once revolved around mills and markets now pulsed with suits, skyscrapers, and stock reports. The NCNB Plaza, completed in 1983, became Charlotte's first modern skyscraper, a glass monument to the city's new identity.
But NCNB wasn't the only player. Across the street stood another rising giant, First Union, led by Ed Crutchfield. What followed was one of the most intense business rivalries in the South. Two local banks competing for dominance, driving each other higher and faster. The rivalry wasn't just about money, it was about pride. Both men wanted to put Charlotte on the national map. Each acquisition, each merger, each skyscraper became part of that race. And the city benefited. Jobs poured in, headquarters relocated. Restaurants, hotels, and cultural centers followed the money. Downtown Charlotte transformed into a gleaming hub of corporate power. By the late 1980s, it was no longer a regional city. It was a national financial center, second only to New York. This meteoric rise came with risk. The same deregulation that fueled Charlotte's banking boom also opened the door to volatility. When markets shifted, fortunes could vanish overnight. Yet the city pressed forward, its optimism unshaken. McCall and Crutchfield became local legends, symbols of the city's boldness and belief that it could redefine what Southern success looked like. In 1991, McCall made his biggest move yet. NCNB merged with CNS Sovereign Corporation of Atlanta and Norfolk to form Nations Bank, a massive regional power. The merger was one of the largest in U.S. banking history at the time. But McCall wasn't done. He wanted to create a truly national bank, one that could rival the giants of Wall Street. That dream became reality in 1998, when Nations Bank acquired Bank America Corporation of San Francisco. Overnight, McCall's Charlotte-based institution became Bank of America, the largest bank in the United States. Charlotte was no longer just a southern city. It was the headquarters of a global financial empire. But with every rise comes tension. Critics warned that the city was becoming too dependent on banking. When the economy stumbled, Charlotte would feel it first. And within the city, not everyone benefited from the boom. As wealth concentrated downtown, many working-class neighborhoods struggled to keep up. The cost of living rose, inequality deepened. Still, for many, the pride of seeing Charlotte rise to global prominence outweighed the concerns. The once small crossroads that named itself after a queen now ruled an empire of finance. By the 1990s, Charlotte's skyline glittered with glass and steel. Uptown buzzed with new restaurants, theaters, and cultural projects. The Blumenthal Performing Arts Center opened in 1992, signaling a broader ambition, not just to be rich, but to be recognized as a center of culture and class. At the same time, civic leaders began investing in urban development and sports. The Carolina Panthers joined the NFL in 1995, bringing national attention to the city. Charlotte Hornets, established in 1988, were already icons. Suddenly, Charlotte wasn't just a financial hub, it was a brand. And its people, once defined by the humble work of mills and mines, now saw themselves as builders of a modern metropolis. Still, Charlotte's transformation wasn't only corporate, it was deeply human. It reflected the same resilience that carried it through gold rushes, wars, and depressions. Every generation had reinvented the city when old industries faded. Now, in the late 20th century, that same spirit had turned Charlotte into one of the most powerful financial centers in the world.